Take your Bible, turn to Psalm 23. Psalm 23. Most of us probably could quote most, if not all, of Psalm 23. We've heard it. Many of us have lived it. But we'd like to take just a few minutes tonight and look into Psalm 23, maybe from a little different perspective. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to finish up tonight. We'll let the Lord deal with that one. In Psalm 23, I got to thinking about Psalm 23. I was just thinking about it again while I was sitting there. You know, we're not 100% sure. There are a lot of speculation on exactly when this psalm was written. Some say it was written early in the life of David. Some think it might have been written during his time that he was fleeing from Saul. Some think that it was possibly written later on in his life. I kind of fall out into the middle part, probably there sometime when he was running from Saul. That's just my opinion. I can't nail that down. But I'm going to approach it from that standpoint because I think it'll help us tonight when we start talking about being thankful. And I know we've dealt with that quite a bit, but I think it's a subject, number one, I think it's a subject we could deal with for a lot longer than we have and not exhaust the need and the meaning of being thankful for what God has done. And looking at what God's going to do. And I think as we look at Psalm 23, that's exactly what we see in this psalm. It's David being thankful for what God has done in his life. And you start walking through the life of David and you start, we did a little bit about David and Goliath, and we'll talk a little bit, try to be brief about that in our introduction tonight. But you start walking in the life of David. Whenever he wrote this, if you remember, especially if it was during the time that Saul was after him or later in life, you kind of start to see through his life the things that went into him writing the 23rd Psalm. Now, I understand that I don't want to take away from the fact that I know it's inspired and I know God gave that and wrote through him. I understand that. But I do understand that God used many times the character of the writer and allowed him to put in some of his feelings into that writing. You see that in a lot of different writings in the Scriptures. But as we stop and just by way of introduction, think a little bit about the life of David. What are some of the first things we know about him? We're not going to go far enough and talk a whole lot about his lineage, but you could go all the way back to Ruth. We'll go that far and talk about how Miss Ruth was used, this Moabitess woman who came from a far country, the whole book of Ruth, but and met Boaz. I couldn't think of his name. Met Boaz and how he redeemed her and all the things that happened there, and she's in the lineage there of David. Then we get into the life of David and we find that Samuel comes to the household of David to anoint the new king, and everybody's there except David. Where's David? David's out watching the sheep. I don't know. He was the youngest, but Daddy didn't think that any of all the kids, it wasn't going to be that boy. He was out watching the sheep. Well, he just leave him out there. And so you start kind of seeing the life of David. And then you get into the fact that he's sent to the battle to pick on his brothers. Again, the errand boy of Daddy, here he goes to go out there. And undoubtedly he didn't have a real good relationship with his brothers because they pick on him when he gets there. What are you doing here? And that kind of thing. And then we understand the David and Goliath issue that took place there on the battlefield and how he is lifted up in popularity. And then Saul begins to be concerned about his kingdom and his throne with David. And we understand the things that begin to happen there. And so David goes through a lot of ups and downs in his young life. There are a lot of things that took place. And I almost tried to get, I want to get some technical support from our computer folks that are here. I've got some things. I almost tried to get a piece of a video that I have and show it to you tonight. It's a video of a tour guide in Israel, And they're going from one city to the next, and they stop the bus, and they get off, and they're looking out over this valley in Israel. Now, it's not the same place. He didn't claim that, but it was just an illustration. But you can see where they stop the bus, they're standing there, and there's this deep ravine, this deep valley. And way down in the valley, down toward the bottom, there's a cave down there. And Avi stands there and looking at that cave, and he quotes the 23rd Psalm in Hebrew. And I almost tried to, I'm not technologically swift enough to do that just yet. So I'm going to have to get some training, some learning, and maybe I can do stuff like that. But it's just, the hair stands up on the back of my neck when I listen to that. And now he explains what it is, but he does. He quotes it in Hebrew. And the story goes like this. And there are some that believe that David was in a cave just like that. Not that specific cave, but a cave very similar to that when he wrote the 23rd Psalm. He was fleeing from Saul. Saul was after him. Saul wanted to take his life because he was jealous. And he knew that he was losing the kingdom and David was going to get it. And he didn't want all that. And he was trying to do things in his way. And when you think about it in that standpoint, and you put yourself into that scenery and you see that wilderness of Israel and you see that deep ravine there and that cave down at the bottom, and maybe David's hiding out in that cave, hiding from Saul, fearing for his life, running from the king. He's sitting there that night, he's looking out at the stars, and the Spirit of God moves him, and he takes out the scroll and he begins to write, and this is what he writes. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for Thou art with me. Thy rod and Thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As we see the heart of David poured out on parchment, I think we see the heart's cry of a man who says, thank God for His hand in my life. We're going to take just a few minutes tonight and look through this 23rd Psalm. I think there are some lessons here that we can learn to help us to be thankful. I think lesson number 1 is found in verse number 1, where David cries out, and we find, and I don't know if maybe after every stanza that he wrote, I don't know how it happened. Sometimes I'd like to be in a fly on the wall and just be there and see some of that. I'd like to ask Him one day when I get to heaven and see Him and talk to Him, but I don't know how it actually went, but I wonder if he did not write that first verse, that first stanza and say, the Lord is my shepherd, and I don't know if the tears began to roll down his face. As he sat there in that cave, if that's where he was, or he remembered all that he'd gone through. I wonder if he didn't sit there with a heart of gratitude and say, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. As we look at the wording there and the phrasing there, we can learn the first thing that we need to talk about being thankful is we need to learn that we do have a shepherd. And we need to learn to know Him. I wonder if David, through his life, had not learned that he could trust the Lord. I'm getting way ahead of myself, but had not learned that he could just know Him intimately. I wonder if he remembered some of the high points in his life, maybe sitting out there with the sheep, with his harp, just playing and singing and worshiping God, and the highs of spirituality that we sometimes enjoy as God moves on our hearts and we see the great times and the great things that are going on, and we experience the mountaintops of spirituality. I wonder if he remembered back to those days and said, "The Lord is my shepherd." But yet then he's brought back to reality and reminds himself that he's sitting in a cave running for his life. I wonder if he could say, like we need to say, in the good times and in the bad times, God's still good. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I think Paul made the statement very well in the book of Philippians when he said that I've learned that whatsoever state I'm in, therewith to be content. I think that's the same principle or the same idea that David's trying to get across in verse 1 of Psalm 23 when he said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I will trust Him, I will follow Him, I will do everything. I will know my shepherd." We've got to get to this place of this statement. Is the Lord your shepherd? Have you submitted yourself to the lordship of Christ? Now, I've read a few books. I'm not a shepherd. I've read a few books about shepherds. And let me tell you a couple of things that I gleaned from some of the books that I've read. They tell me that a sheep, while we look at things and we think, "Oh, that's nice. God calls us sheep. Isn't that special? A little cute, little fuzzy animal. That's nice." Sheep are stupid. Sheep are dumb animals. I mean, they're not known for their intelligence. Not only are they not known for their intelligence, they're blind as a bat backing up. They can't see past their nose. I mean, they're not smart and they can't see. They can hear pretty well, but they can't see. And so it's interesting when you start learning about these sheep. But one thing about sheep is sometimes you get one of them little stubborn sheep. Now, none of us have had to deal with stubborn sheep, all right? So just smile right there, it'll be okay. But sometimes they get one of them little stubborn sheep that don't want to listen to the shepherd. And he wants to do his own thing, and I don't know why I'm saying he, but anyway. He wants to do his own thing. He won't follow direction, won't go where he's told, won't do all the things that the shepherd instructs him to do. So in some of the books that I've read, they've said what happens if this sheep keeps getting into trouble and straying from the flock and getting out into a place where he's going to get hurt. What the shepherd will do is in love, he'll retrieve that sheep and he'll retrieve that sheep and he'll retrieve that sheep until it comes to a place where that sheep has demonstrated that he is not going to submit himself to the shepherd. Well, what that shepherd would do is he'd take that little sheep and he'd break the legs of that sheep. And the entire healing process of that sheep, he was totally dependent upon the shepherd. If he was going to do anything, go anywhere, eat anything, drink anything, it was because the shepherd provided it for him. And they say that once that happens, and that little sheep heals up, that little sheep learns his lesson and never strays far from the shepherd. I wonder if David didn't sit there in that cave when he made that statement, "The Lord is my shepherd." I wonder if he didn't think about the times that metaphorically God had to break his legs, bring him back into the fold, nurse him back to health. He would learn the lesson to know the shepherd. I think as we go into verse number 2, and there's so much here, we could spend a lot of time, and we don't want to be here all night. He said in verse 2, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Verse 3 says, "He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake." I wonder if David, as he penned those two stanzas, didn't think about following God in his lifetime. I wonder if he didn't think about following God. It took some faith to follow God into Goliath. That's exactly what David said. You come against me with sword and spear. I come against you in the name of the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. Took some faith to follow God into Goliath. Took some faith to follow God and receiving the kingdom. Took some faith. He had to learn to follow the shepherd. The way we learn to follow the shepherd is we understand a couple of things about the shepherd. Verse 1, we get to know Him. Verse 2, we learn about Him through our activities and through following God and walking with Him. First thing we've got to do is come to the understanding that God knows where He's going. That sounds simple. But how many times have we questioned where God was going? God, I don't know where you're going with this. I'm not sure about all this stuff. I don't know what's happening here. Now don't look at me like that. We've all been there. And we question what God's doing. We've got to continue to learn that God knows exactly where He's going. He says, He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Why does He make them? Because a sheep is stupid. Did I get that point across already? See, the sheep, they can't go by what they see. They go a lot about what they hear. They wouldn't know where the green pastures are. They can't see them. And you can't hear green pastures. Or you can hear running water. They're attracted to that, and that's another problem we'll talk about in a minute. But the shepherd has to lead them there and take them there. They have to learn that if they're going to be fed, they need to trust and follow the shepherd because he knows where he's going, and he's going to lead us to the place that we need to be. Listen, God knows exactly what we need and where it is that we need to get what He wants for us. We've got to learn to follow Him because He knows where He's going. We need to learn to follow Him. He goes on and says this, He leadeth me in the path of right. Back up, verse 2. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Why is that important? When we were younger, matter of fact, our son was probably, how old was Casey? Was he 3 when we went canoeing, 2 or 3? We went canoeing. I won't tell you the whole story for sake of time, but we went canoeing. And it was cold, and we shouldn't have gone. But anyway, we were young and not as... Well, anyway, we were young. And so we went canoeing, and my wife wore a sweater because it was cold. And it was a big sweater, and it was all warm, but it was made of wool. Well, lo and behold, we ended up turning the canoe over and going in the water. We like to not got her out of the water. I think the level of the creek dropped about 2 foot when she hit the water. It soaked up so much water in that wool. I mean, it got heavy. And there for a little bit, we got really concerned about getting her out. It got, you want to know the whole story, ask me after church, I'll tell you the whole thing. It got a little harrowing. But that wool, I mean, it just soaked up all that water and got very, very heavy. That same thing happens to, listen, sheep they have wool on them, right? You understand that? That's what they grow. So that's why it's important we talked about the idea of still water. You ever looked at a sheep's little spindly leg? I'm going to talk about spindly legs and we'll get back up here. All right. So, their legs aren't that strong. They aren't that sturdy. And the problem is, these sheep, if they hear the running water and they're drawn to that because they can hear it. So they're drawn to the running water. However, if these sheep get into the running water and it gets into their wool, what's going to happen to these sheep? They're going to be swept away by the water, and you only get swept away once comfortably. Y'all can laugh. It's okay. Y'all can smile. That was a joke. All right? So that's what happens. So the shepherd has to lead them to the still water where they can safely and comfortably drink and satisfy their thirst. He has to lead them to the the pasture. He has to lead them to the water. He has to take care of them because they could not do it themselves. They have to learn to follow the shepherd. We need to be thankful that God knows where He's going and God knows what we need and God's promised to provide and lead us exactly where we need to be. As we keep reading in the Psalm, we see in verse 4, he said, Yea, though I walk to the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for Thou art with me. Thy rod and Thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. We've got to get to the place to where we trust the shepherd. If we get to know Him, begin to follow Him, the more we know Him and the more we follow Him, the more we'll trust Him. David got to a point in his life where he could make a statement like verse number 4, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I don't know exactly where that is. There are some that say there's a valley in Israel that's called the Valley of the Shadow. I don't know. But I know what it implies. And I know that there are some difficulties in our life that we're going to face. And although there's some hard times that are going to come, and although there's some struggles that are going to approach in our life, and what we've got to do in those circumstances, we've got to learn to fear no evil because God is with us and God will walk with us and His rod and His staff is going to comfort us. He's going to take care of us and we need to learn to trust Him through all that we face. And as we commit ourselves to Him, and as we walk with Him, as we follow Him, we get to verse 5. And I wish I had some cute little saying to say about verse 5, but I'm so overwhelmed by the truth in verse number 5 that I don't have anything. But look at what it says. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Even in the very presence of those that wish to destroy us. God says, don't worry about that. Come see what I have prepared for you. Don't worry about all of that. I got this. Come see what I have prepared for you. A table in the wilderness that no one else knows anything about. How do you Christians? How do you go on? How do you keep your head up? Because my God prepares a table for me. Nobody else knows about. My God meets my needs. My God always takes care of me. He's prepared that table. I don't know what's on that table for you. Usually I don't know what's on that table for me until I get there. But aren't you glad that He has said there's no circumstance that can overcome you? He can't prepare peace in the midst of the storm. Let me ask you a question. And I know this is not a frivolous question. You understand what I mean by that? This is not something that I take lightly. But here's the question. When's the last time God did not meet your need? When's the last time you had a circumstance and God did not show up and God did not comfort you? I'm thinking. I can't come up with one. Now, I know if we went around this room and we started talking to individuals, we could find some folks in this room that have gone through some that have gone through, are going through, and are about to go through some pretty harrowing things. But we'd be hard-pressed to find anybody in this room that would honestly be able to stand up and say, yeah, well, I went through this and God never showed up. God's always there. And let you know a little secret. If God, I don't know why I'm doing this, it's all. If God was there last time, He'll be there this time. And He'll be there next time. Sometimes we forget. And we get so worried and so overwhelmed. And we just need to be reminded. Trust the Savior. Trust your shepherd. He knows. That's why I encourage you, keep a journal. Guys don't like to hear that. Write some things down. Keep some notes. Sounds better. Write some things down. Why? Because the next time you're struggling and the next time you're thinking, God, I don't know if I can handle this. Where are you? Go back and look at your notes and think, ooh, yeah, I remember that one. Goodness, I didn't think I was going to make it through that one either. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's when He showed up and did this. Oh, yeah, well, now I remember that. Our memories, we remember the bad stuff forever and the good stuff we don't remember overnight. We need to learn to be thankful. Notice what else He said in verse 5. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Can I ask you another question? Now, I'm trying to make this fun tonight. I really am. When's the last time your cup really ran over? Well, you know, it's not the supply of God. That's not the problem. It's not. He can touch our lives and He can bring us to the place where our cup runneth over. Why? Because He's the one that anoints us with oil. He's the one that puts it there in the first place. He's the one that works in our life. It's all on Him. And He wants to do it if we'll submit ourselves to Him and let Him do it in our life. So if we'll know the shepherd, we'll thank Him for who He is. And we'll follow the shepherd. And we'll thank Him for the direction that He gives us in our lives. And we'll trust the shepherd. As old Lester Roloff used to say, when you can't track Him, you trust Him. He was an old pilot. You know, that's kind of the way it worked. When you can't trust Him, when you can't track Him, you trust Him. When we get to know an idea where we trust the Lord, even though we can't see it, then we can understand what David was talking about when he got to verse number 6. Surely, goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. What was David saying when he got to verse number 6? I think as he wrote this, I can just see in my mind's eye, I can just see when he wrote verse number 1, I can see the tears rolling down his face as he remembered the difficulties that he'd faced and the things that he'd gone through. As he did verse number 2 and verse number 3, I think he can remember some of the hard times that he went through and when he really lacked some things in life, but God showed up. I don't know if this was before or after the time of old Ziklag, but I wonder if it was after, if he didn't think of that city and coming back with his mighty men and seeing that city on fire and getting there and the city being burned and his wife and family carted off as slaves and the men turning on him and wanting to kill him right there on the spot. And I wonder if David didn't think, whoo, that was a low spot. That was a rough time in my life. But you know, even in that rough time, I wanted to follow God and I did what was right according to the Lord. And the Bible said that David strengthened himself in the Lord. He said, you know, I just wanted to trust Him and let Him lead me and take care of me, and I wanted to follow Him. And he started reading it, and he kept writing, and went down through, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I wonder if he didn't remember the nights that he spent in a cave running from Saul, fearing for his life. I wonder if he didn't remember some of the times that he faced difficulty in his life. And then he got down to the end, and he remembered how God showed up every time. And God never left him alone. And God always brought the answer. And I wonder if as he penned verse number 6, I wonder if he didn't have a Baptist spell right there and just say, bless God, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. I want to walk with God, and I want to see God do great things, and I want to see God be glorified and magnified, and I want to honor Him. And if I'll walk with Him, and I'll know Him, and I'll follow Him, and I'll trust Him, I'll have joy in my heart because I'll see the hand of God working in my life. And then the result of that, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Oh, I don't ever want to leave the house of God. Now, I understand he wasn't specifically talking about putting a cot down somewhere in a church house. I understand that. He was talking about dwelling in the presence of God. He was talking about being where God is, letting God speak to him. I wonder if we could take the 23rd Psalm, one that we've heard over and over again. We couldn't once again just read through it and say, Father, help me to be thankful. Help me to see your hand in my life. Help me to make some decisions that'll keep me where I need to be, take me where you want me to be. Let's look at it one more time. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pasture. Oh, He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for Thou art with me. Thy rod and Thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Heads are bowed, eyes are closed. Maybe tonight you'd like to just